Funding for this program is brought to you by Bismarck Big Boy. From pizza burgers flying style to fast and delicious fried chicken, Bismarck Big Boy has been a local legend since 1954.
Bismarck, my childhood was called the Avenue B Gang, and I could walk from my house on First Street and Avenue B 3 blocks to get to Cathedral School, and without even going off that road, we had 58 grade school children.
Timothy Ralph, or T.R. Atkinson, was a professional engineer who arrived in Bismarck with his family in 1906. T.R. became the state engineer in 1907 and was responsible for upgrading the city's water distribution system, along with overseeing the design and construction of many buildings and roads throughout Bismarck. His son Myron was one of Bismarck's senior administrative officials for 32 years. Myron's son, Myron Jr., established Atkinson Nature Park, served in the state legislature, and was a board attorney for St. Alexis Hospital and the University of Mary.
T.R. Atkinson started as a civil engineer, formal education on the East Coast, came to Fargo, became the first city engineer for Fargo, then moved to Bismarck in 1904 to become the first state engineer, is what we now call him. They used to call him the water engineer back then. And he had that job for 4 years and got fired. He then ended up becoming the city engineer for the city of Bismarck, the county engineer for Burleigh County. Back then they used to call them highway engineers. And also did other projects. Basically no one job paid enough to be full-time, so he had to take on all sorts of different jobs to do it. Okay? I ran across some of his original survey work as I was doing the research. He actually was responsible for the design of the old Highway 10, which, if from Bismarck, not only is it the old Highway 10, it's the old Highway 10. He did the design work out to Minokan. He was the engineer on record. He turned out to be the engineer on record for the original buildings to the Bismarck Indian School, it's amazed me the number of times I have found folks who didn't even know we had an Indian school here in Bismarck. He built several water treatment plants in small towns around the area. He was actively involved in the fight with Alexander McKinsey over the city of Bismarck water plant, water distribution system, and basically was the bad guy when the city of Bismarck decided to take over the water treatment plant. Got dragged through that one, got badly beat up. I remember my grandma Barth actually talking about how TR was badly treated because he was an enemy of Alexander McKinsey, and that's just the way it was back then. He died of a heart attack in the office. If just recently, last Saturday, here we had the 150th anniversary of the city of Bismarck, and up on the wall they had a drawing of the original airport as laid out. T.R. Atkinson was the design engineer for that one. So, that's how far up to the work he did. Lo and behold, here I'm sitting at the Minnesota Historical Society, and I run across an original drawing from 1899. It is the first plat of the city of Moorhead, Minnesota, done by Timothy Ralph Atkinson. That was been my great-grandfather. My son was with me at the time, and so I sat there and said, look at this. This is an original plat. That's his handwriting, everything. This is your great-grandfather did this work. And it was like, wow.
Both of our grandfathers had died before any of us kids were born, so the grandmothers were part of this. But that put me into a sense of Bismarck history. Like, I grew up with the names that are the schools. So Jeanette Myrie, Dorothy Moses, these weren't people that were famous or schools or anything. They were Graham and Nan's friends. You know, I think Stella Mann was not the leader of the Bismarck Tribune. She was where I went with my grandmother for pie after civic music. So the grandmothers had that type of historic piece and rootedness. They also were part of Bismarck's strong women. There were some very strong women, Finney, Tavis, Mann, Sorley, Atkinson, Barthen. These were the movers and the shakers. Many of them had come from pretty poor families, came into Bismarck, and worked their way up the social ladder.
He loved his work. He really enjoyed it. He didn't do any that he didn't love. He didn't do custody or anything like that. He liked development so much and business. And I never worked when he was in the service for 2.5 years when we were first married. After 4 years of college and 2 years of being trained to be a lawyer, he had graduated, and then the Army, in their wisdom, put him in the medical corps. He said he could deliver a baby, he could do anything, and that's not what he wanted to do. He managed to get into the legal department, and from there, he got into the JAG. And that was what he loved and was good at, and spent his time in service in the Judge Advocate Corps. Came home and loved the law, but he didn't want to be doing anything messy. He would like to be doing business law.
My sense of the Atkinson family really gets described in a couple of words, and one is a we-ness, okay? A group. Not only were there 6 of us born in 8 years, so that puts you all moving together, and then a 7th one coming along, but the Atkinson family lived with our 2 grandmothers, and they were a part of the family. So having both mom's mom and dad's mom, so you start with a group of about 9, and that's how we functioned. We were active. We were always encouraged to be very active, and I think because of who mom and dad were and who we were just born in to be, I say some people are academic families and some are maybe music families or athletic families, and the Atkinsons weren't any of those. We were groupies. We were Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and 4-H and projects and clubs and always involved in that type of stuff.
My dad was actively involved in Bismarck. Sister Kathy and I, one of her stories, we would joke because my dad would sit there. Sometimes he'd get very frustrated with us. He was a very loving man, very compassionate man, but he would get frustrated. And ever so often he would suddenly get mad and go, that's it. Either tell me yes, no, or go to hell. Kathy and I often speculated what would happen if we picked door number 3 and see what would have happened there.
I was a little bit older, but I remember I was out with my dad's car. Probably I was a senior in high school, and sitting at the breakfast table, and And he went out to leave, goodbye. He said, I'm going to work. And he came back in and he had a can of beer and he put it on the breakfast table in front of me and said, I think you forgot this in the car. And then he left and went to work. And that's sort of the way, the message was across without any hysterics. So pretty even keeled. It took a lot to get something more drastic than that.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
When you talk about a person, I always think of a person in terms, they talk about a person donating time, talent, and treasure. And in most cases, people get kind of focused on the treasure. How much did you donate here? How did you do that? What I believe my dad's real ability was in his ability to do time and talent. You take something like the Clem Casey estate. Clem Casey developed a lot of this land up in this area where this building is. He had the talent to start that development, and then he developed an estate that had a lot of money in it. My dad was able to take his time, dedicated a lot of time to the Clem Casey estate, and his talent to continue developing the Clem Casey estate. Well, the money from the Clem Casey estate over the years has gone to the Catholic schools in Bismarck. That donation has worked out to around $20 million, not brought forward for inflation. Those are actual numbers. It's a beautiful gift that's been given to Bismarck. And my dad was able to use his talent and donated his time to make it work. Same with the University of Mary, St. Alexis, Bismarck State College. We weren't able to donate a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of money, but my dad was able to donate his time, and he had the talent to develop things. One of his favorite sayings was, he says, everybody says, whatever I touch turns to gold. He goes, they're right, it only takes 30, 40 years to have that happen. And you look back and you think in terms of, my dad developed Tatley Meadow Mobile Home Court, very nice mobile home court on the south side of town. He developed a lot of the stuff on North State Street, just south of the interstate. That was all Clem Casey property. He was involved in the development up on Washington Street and 43rd Avenue. He had property up there. Again, that was somebody else's property, but he was able to take his time, his talent to develop it. And the end result is very nice additions to Bismarck and good, profitable projects for all involved. So I feel that was his unique ability, time and talent.
My earliest memory, I can tell you that, because I think the only survivor I can remember when the Capitol burned. And we looked out, my mother and I was 3.5, I think. And I looked out and there was this black stuff going by the window, which I told my mother about. And she, being a good sort, put her coat on, my coat on, and we went up to the Capitol and watched it burn. And I don't remember coming home, but I sure remember running up.
I wasn't born here, but almost, and lived here in the 50s, and lived here in the 60s, lived here in the 70s, and I absolutely loved Bismarck at that time. It was much simpler. One of my favorite memories of earlier Bismarck, we lived in the Cathedral neighborhood, pretty close to downtown, and almost all commerce at the time took place in the downtown area. There were a few little outlying areas, but for the most part, when you did Christmas shopping or birthday shopping or just wanted to have fun, you went to the core of the downtown for record albums, for school clothes, for Boy Scout stuff, for bike tires, even for automobiles, because the car dealerships were mostly located right in the center of downtown back then. So I liked all the vibrancy of the downtown as it was, and there were so many little family type restaurant and cafe operations on every corner and in the middle of the block, and they'd be little family operations. One would specialize in sloppy joes, one in apple pie with ice cream, one in meatloaf, and I think I was talking to Mom recently, and I said, I don't know if you can buy a tuna melt sandwich in downtown Bismarck today. And I said, and then we listed the different A.W. Lucas and F.W. Woolworths and the Drumstick and Fink's Cafe and Wrestlers. And we came up with 25 places where you could buy a tuna melt sandwich with a plate of chips and a Coke, and it was 35 cents. And so there was all of this, the crazy days and different things that would take place downtown, and downtown, as sort of contained as it is, had very colorful sections to it, which were wonderful for us to ride our bikes down and explore as kids. Now, those are the days when you'd go in the alley and you'd climb the fire escape up to the top of the buildings, and then you'd scamper around on the roofs, and nobody said, "Hey, what are you doing up there?" You know, it was just a whole different, more casual environment. Or we could go down in the basement of the GP Hotel, and that whole block was connected from store to store to store. And I think that a lot of the connections were related to the old steam tunnels that used to provide municipal steam up into the city. And so there were all these places to explore. The east side of Fifth Street was a lot rougher than the west side of Fifth Street. So moms told their kids, you know, it was a time when they didn't say, only go here and come back, or I'll give you a ride. It was be home by dinner time or be home by dark. And then the rest was up to us. We just filled it with whatever we wanted to do. But the west side of Fifth Street downtown was pretty stable. The east side had a small tavern and a small bowling alley and a little pool hall. And it was the kind of place where if we were on the west side of Fifth Street, on the east side of Fifth Street at 10 o'clock in the morning, the doors would fly open on the tavern and somebody'd come scooting out onto the sidewalk, or a couple of guys would come out. We loved it, right? I mean, it was just this whole different environment. We shouldn't, I don't think it's any secret to Mom, but it was a time when if you were 11 years old, you could go into Finney Drug, into the big elaborate cigar counter, and buy a 15-cent White Owl cigar and go smoke it in the alley, and all kinds of fun things to do, or at least fun things to do for people our age.
Bismarck, my childhood, was called the Avenue B Gang, and I could walk from my house on First Street and Avenue B 3 blocks to get to Cathedral School, and without even going off that road, we had 58 grade school children. 7 here, Churchill 8, Thorndal, Hummel, these big 6, 7, 8 children families. And you played. You had the neighborhood. You played in the street. I did have a sense of safety. And I almost had a sense that, you know, Bismarck was here. It was here for us. We never questioned whether or not we should be playing in the street. You know, it's kind of like, well, that's what you do. In the neighborhood, on the block that we lived in, I think one of the most significant places was we had a vacant lot.
I think they had envisioned alleys at one time. They never built them. And so consequently, it was a vacant lot. Somebody owned it, but we all called it the vacant lot. And we'd go play softball out there. The older kids couldn't do it because they could drive the ball easily over the fence, but us younger kids could. We'd also build forts out there, snow forts, and do little things like that.
I remember we'd go over for Mass in the morning sometimes, and there'd be women that would come at about 4:30 in the morning and start from scratch to prepare the hot lunch for the day. So right during Mass, the aroma from the whatever casserole or something they had gotten up early to make it start working its way up into the church. And if you go to Cathedral today to the 8 o'clock Mass, you can still often have that aroma come on up, and you know what's for hot lunch.
Part of the history of Bismarck that I think we are losing is some of the stuff that went on very early on what Edmund Hughes worked on some of his electrical stuff, on the MDU power plant that used to sit down by the railroad tracks, on C.B. Little, how hard he tried to save the riverboat industry that was dying because the railroad basically took it over, but he worked so hard. Those are things that we're starting to lose. I mentioned the Bismarck Indian School. It is very tough to bring up a discussion of the Bismarck Indian School without having some very strong emotions about it being brought up.
I really am a firm believer, and I'm learning it. Maybe it's part of my aging process, or it's also part of my formation as a family member, that the more we look and claim the history of Bismarck, the more that we can really lift up those values, and that these are new times, but we've been through them before. I think that's really important, to call upon the traditions of some of those people that did the hard work of watering the trees during the Depression. I was blessed to hear those stories of people that just took buckets of water and kept trees going, and that's why we have parks now. Who are the people that are going to water the trees today? That's significant. That's about being an Atkinson, about being a Benedictine, and about being a Bismarcker. We've got a long, great history of growth, and I do think that some of those early pioneers would come back, because I could go up to St. Mary's Cemetery. On Mom's side of the family, it really goes back 5 generations. And then on Dad's side of the family, it goes 3 generations. And then we have all these other families that we just take flowers to because they've been part of us. And that's part of honoring the past. Honoring the past and just, I think, believing in the present and the future. That's it. And it's a good one.
I had a very happy life. I'm very grateful. Good family, good friends, good marriage, good kids. What more do? Oh dear. I'm also very sentimental.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
I asked Pa, I said, "What do you think Riverwood, Pa? Do you think that'd be a good name?" So I submitted that name and I won it.
Remember when the Capitol burned? I looked out and there was this black stuff going by the window.
The president of Woolworth at the time's name was Kirkwood.
My parents decided, I think my mom decided, that Bismarck needed a zoo. So